Welcome to the October 14th, 2020 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm, East Coast Executives. We'll continue the leadership conversation today by welcoming a leadership and development torchbearer and author of the book, Retention Strategies to Prepare and Maintain Talent for Future Leadership Roles. Such an important topic in today's world. How are we developing our leaders, especially our diverse leaders, and what is the commitment coming from corporate America? Today, we have a corporate America veteran, Dr. Shagranda Traveler. Dr. Traveler, welcome to the Digital Career Success Series.
Awesome, welcome. Thanks for having me.
And we are so excited to have you. We've been talking about leadership the past few episodes, and we just think it's such an important topic for us to really embrace all the talent that exists in our communities and communities of color in general, and kind of supporting them and positioning themselves in corporate America to advance, kind of like you advance. So I wanted to have you on because I'm like, listen, once they hear about her accomplishments, they'll understand how important it is to gain insight from someone like yourself. So thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Honored to be here, honored to share, and just looking to take part in a very interactive conversation for sure.
No, but I'm glad you said interactive because I really want this to be an interactive discussion. One thing I will say about the Digital Career Success Series platform is that our audience is very interactive. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to some great questions coming out of the queue, and let's get started.
I think that will be perfect. So, Kenneth, National Urban League, Christian, all of you, thank you so much for having me. And so when I think about this opportunity and the ability to stand in this platform, it's important for me to make sure that I give back and that that I share information that's going to be relevant and timely. So I'll talk a little bit about me, but really, this is really what can I do to support the audience. I've spent the last 19 years in corporate America. 14 of those years have been at the vice president level for a Fortune 50 firm. And when you're talking about an organization with over 200,000 employees, we'll talk about how do you navigate through an environment such as that. Also, my talent development career began with the Greater Shreveport Chamber of Commerce. And I really am proud to say that I really live in my purpose. This is a discipline that really drew my attention and I've remained in it. So that is something that as we're talking about different development strategies, we'll talk about living and driving and being in your purpose. Also, I'm an award-winning leader. Most recently, I was recognized by the National Black MBA Association as their 2019 Community Champion of the Year. And also, Walden University, their board of directors, presented me with the Leadership Excellence Award in 2020, and that was out of 144,000 potential alumni. So I'm really excited about those. And so it's because individuals have poured into me that I'm able to pour into others. Next slide. All right, so if I think about my leadership brand, and we're going to talk about some of the strategies, branding, I tend to identify myself as a talent amplifier. I'm a thought leader and I'm a community champion. And so if you look on this right side of the screen, you'll see that on the left side of the screen, you'll see I graduated undergrad, Louisiana Tech University, and I'm a proud member of the Divine Nine. So the Divine Nine is getting a lot of recognition right now when we think about the nominee for Vice President of the United States. And, we think about these different groups and how we can support each other. You'll see there again, started my career with the Greater Shreveport Chamber of Commerce, and I actually led the Leadership Shreveport-Bossier Leadership Development Program. And that was a program where we got individuals who were ready to not quite ready to serve on the Chamber's Board of Directors. And we put them through this very intensive program. And I just was able to grow the program, double-digit growth in 1 year. So I decided to take myself through that same experience, and I went through Leadership Mansfield. And when I tell you, it was an amazing experience. Again, very active with the National Black MBA Association, received my MBA from the University of Dallas, and most recently my DBA, Doctor of Business Administration, from Walden University. So that's a little bit about me. I'll pause there. Kenneth, do you have anything before we transition into our core discussion?
You know what? No, thank you for sharing the background information, and I'm ready to go. I'm just interested in kind of hearing what you have to speak on about leadership.
Awesome, awesome. So let me tell you, when I think of who I am as a leader, my goal and my obligation, I think a lot of times we forget that leadership is an honor to me that is bestowed upon us. And it is my obligation as a talent development leader to help employees gain the transferable and marketable skills for the future. And so just in a sentence, I help employees prepare so that they can increase their exposure and knowledge across the organizations. What you will see there in those two boxes are two very startling statistics. One, 80%, research shows that 80% of employees do not have skills for future roles. So you can only imagine what that means for talent of color. Also, another startling statistic by the Harvard Business Review is that 62% of employees left their role because there was not enough development. So as a talent development leader, I look at this type of data and I get excited. I get a little bit angry and I get a little bit frustrated, right? Because I'm like, wow, why can't we have individuals out there, right? And we're doing our best to develop them, but why do they not have the skills for the future? Some of that, and we'll talk about it on the next slide, but Christian, can you go to the next slide? So here, when we start thinking about planning for success in corporate America, so a couple of things that I want to share. When I look at those statistics, again, daunting, then I have to understand, as I have led corporate change initiatives for organizations, again, 150,000 plus employees, I have personally outlined what I consider to be the recipe for a high performing organization, right? So you start with the right mix of talent, you sprinkle in some of those organizational controls to manage risk, you fold in a very strong corporate culture of inclusion, ethics, and integrity, and then you add a dash of willingness to embrace change. Now, many of those factors, team, are not things that you individually will be able to have ownership and control of, right? But there are some pieces, and we'll talk about 4 strategies that I think will help you as you go through this process of being a leader in corporate America and succeeding in corporate America. So let's talk about risk management for a second. Again, talent pipeline, that's all that and we'll focus on that. We're going to do a deep dive. But when we start talking about risk management, right? In highly regulated organizations, and again, most of your big banks, they've found themselves sanctions, censored, fines, just because the risk management component had some gaps. But in highly regulated organizations, there is little tolerance for not having a framework for managing risk. And so you have to make sure that that's an element. So as you're looking for organizations that you want to partner with and work for, really understand their risk management. Are they really doing what they need to do? And so there's 3 lines of defense when managing risk, right? You have to identify your key risks. You have to design and implement effective controls. And then there has to be an internal audit component to that, right? Culture. We keep hearing about culture. What does that really mean, right? Culture is such a broad term. I think of culture as a shared vision of inclusiveness, right? And it must be created where all levels within the organization embrace the value of diversity in people and thought. As a thought leader, right, we have to make sure that people value not only that we look a certain way, but what we say, right? And how we do what we say. So being incredibly inclusive and working to benefit the entire firm is truly what I think about from a culture perspective. And I sort of love the saying of doing the right thing even when no one is looking. That is key. And then finally, the change management. Change is inevitable, right? We look at 2020, and I think if we could describe 2020 as anything, right? It's change, and it's uncomfortable change, right? But when you think about leadership, you must build teams that have leaders who think globally, are lifelong learners, are technically savvy, and are willing to reach back and help others understand how to succeed in tomorrow's world. So those are, when I think about what does it take, what is that recipe? I think those are the things: talent, risk, culture, and change. You have to be open to change.
So Dr. Traveler, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you were speaking of diversity of thought and corporate culture and things of that nature. So now currently we're, with COVID-19, a lot of us are working remotely, right? So, even under normal circumstances, people find it difficult to position their abilities and their thought leadership or their thought diversity in a normal setting. How do people do that in what possibly is a remote setting?
That's a great question, Kenneth, especially considering I used to travel roughly about 50% of the time. And so for 8 years, I actually worked remotely, right? And we have heard of the saying, out of sight, out of mind. Now, when you're in front of people, they're able to see you, they think about you for the next opportunity. And really, that 8 years that I was remote, I was busy. I had my head buried. I was doing so many things. But again, when it came time for the next opportunity, and I would see people getting promoted and things of that nature, and I was like, well, what about me? And again, it truly is an out of sight, out of mind. Cool. So after that became relevant to me, I said, I have to rebrand myself, right? I have to make sure that I include myself and be intentional about showing up in those environments that people don't know, as you're walking past someone's office, hey, I'm going to this meeting, come on down. Okay, perfect. But how do you do that in a virtual environment? So what I would say to that is make sure that you're connected in different networks, the employee resource groups that's within the firm. Stay connected there. Don't stretch yourself too thin, right? Because sometimes you can be involved in too much and you're just showing up and you're not adding value, or the organization isn't really adding value to what you need. So you just have to be very intentional, and you have to raise your hand and get a sponsor. I know there's a lot of conversations out there about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. That mentor is someone that you can go to and say, I just need to vent. But that sponsor is going to be your advocate for you when you're not in the room. So when you're not visible at the table, when you're in this virtual environment. So I think those are the things that I would say. Being intentional about being engaged in those things that will have an impact, and also making sure that you have the right people advocating for you in your absence.
Speaking on having a sponsor, in the past we've had conversations in the chat. And if anybody wants to chime in, this is a great time to share something with us in the Q&A or chat. But in the past, we've had people basically share their frustrations that came from not being able to get on the radar of potential sponsors. How do you suggest that people position themselves to even be in place for sponsorship consideration?
You know, once we go through these 4 development strategies, Kenneth, I think this will give people true practical action items, right? Real robust and raw, right? Tools that they can, I think a lot of times getting on someone's radar, it's hard to ask people, hey, will you advocate for me if they do not know you, right?
Right.
And so people have to know you, but then they want to know that if they advocate for you, that you're not going to go show out once they begin to advocate for you.
Sure.
So that is something that we have to make sure that, again, I sort of think about the risk averse. People are risk averse when it comes to people, right? Will me backing this individual cause me risk? Will it in turn impact my own personal brand? So we have to make sure that we are doing all the things that we can get in front of people, that they're willing to advocate for us, because I've sat in so many talent conversations over the course of my career. And what I will say is that some managers, because I won't necessarily say they're leaders, not all managers are leaders, but some managers have a very long memory when it comes to individuals failing, right? And so I know we hear this term, fail fast, fail forward, but sometimes our individuals, our leaders of color, our talent of color, that memory of them failing, it's not always equal that they can fail fast and fail forward by virtue of some of their other counterparts. Yeah. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we have people coaching and guiding us in the right direction, so that when we have these stumbles, because we are human and we will, that they're not career altering stumbles. And so again, as we talk about some of these strategies, I think we'll be able to show individuals what you can do, how you can place yourself in the best setting for other leaders to take a vested interest in you, and to, again, be willing to sponsor and advocate for you.
All right, great. I'm excited about hearing it through, so let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. So this is what I would say. The topic of what we're going to discuss, and we can stay on this slide, Christian. So the topic of what we're going to focus on, having a successful career in corporate America amidst mergers, acquisition, and new technology, right? And it's a quote that I put. Any kind of job is going to have a digital component. It doesn't mean that everyone has to go in and become a computer scientist, right? So when we're thinking about digitization, our world is changing, and it has changed. And digital disruption and the demand for us to do things in an innovative manner is just disrupting so many industries. So if I could get you in the mindset of thinking about digital disruption technology from a place that it's not scary, I think that's going to be one of the key takeaways that's going to really be a driver in these strategies. So what I would say here, I believe that the key to success in corporate America is hinged on 4 development strategies. And they are: think like a business owner. So I'll say this is going to be self-motivated. You own your career, but it's up to you to maintain a competitive advantage, right? You have to achieve the results that lead to long-term value, right? So when you're thinking about what do you need to do, this self-motivation, this drive, you have to come in with the mindset that I am the owner of my career and I am going to be futuristic about what's coming, right? And so when you do that, you have to develop ideas that's going to meet emerging needs. So if your ideas are things that's already happened or things that are not going, right? When you think about an organization with 150,000 employees, your ideas have to not just say, well, this is what I need. How can your ideas help the broader organization? So that's be the first element there, being self-motivated.
That's a very interesting point. So we had her name is JT O'Donnell. She is the founder of Work It Daily. It's a career site, and we had her on the show speaking to people about how to kind of navigate in this in the COVID-19 pandemic. But she always says, and for years she says, we're all a business of one. And I always looked at that just as it sounds, right? But then when you start thinking about being a business of one, there are some components to working a business where you have to advance forward. And if that's technology, that's what it is, but you have to view yourself as a business, and these are just the tools necessary to advance. So I always looked at it as an internal statement, but it's really even outside of that and the overall emphasis on just helping and adding value across the board.
Absolutely. And I will wrap up this particular, the self-motivation, think like a business owner, with things very tangible. Get your pen and paper out, because this is going to be some wow elements that you really probably haven't thought about. One, when we think of a business owner and we think of any business, what are the things they must do? They must keep their commitments, right? So you think, okay, well, as an employee, as a leader, I have to keep my commitments, truly driving that element home. You have to communicate effectively. If people do not understand what you're attempting to say, then they cannot follow you. They cannot follow your lead. So you must communicate effectively. Also, as any business owner, you must consistently raise the bar. If what you're doing today is the same thing that you were doing back in 2000, why? And the world is changing, right? It's ever changing. And again, technology comes into that. And if you're still, not to use the example of Blockbuster and Redbox, right? You saw Blockbuster wasn't willing to change. Sure. And that they're no longer in existence, right? And so we have to make sure that we are constantly raising the bar.
Dr. Traveler, there's probably people on this that don't even know what Blockbuster is, right? They're probably like, what in the world is Blockbuster? But that's, to your point, if you don't change, you will become extinct.
Exactly. Absolutely. And the final piece that I'll say here is you have to be a change agent, right? You have to be willing to roll up the sleeves and do the work for you. And so that's sort of what we were talking about, Kenneth, when you say, how do you get sponsorship? You have to be willing, right? You can't have your mindset, and we'll talk about growth mindset, but you cannot have your mindset so fixated on just you, that you forget about everyone else. And that being willing to get into the sandbox and to have that conversation, sometimes uncomfortable conversations, but you have to be willing to embrace change, accept that change will happen, and then figure out a plan for moving forward. And that, to me, is how you begin to get sponsorship. When people see that you just do not have your feet planted in the sand, and you have to be just so focused on making sure that you're able to get things done. Okay. So the next strategy, so that was strategy one, think like a business owner. The next one, what I would say, is to define your personal brand. What is your leadership style? I'm curious, for those on the call, what's your leadership style? There are tons of them, but there's two primary leadership styles. You have a transformational leadership style, and you have a transactional leadership style. The transformational, which I am, is more people focused. It's really about getting things done through people. Transactional is just as it says, the transactions. It's more about doing instead of connecting the people. Now you need both to get the work done, right? But it's most CEOs, most very top senior military leaders, they're very, very transformational because they're transforming, right? How people think, how people move. How do you move this 150,000 person ship, i.e. your corporation? So that's something that I want you to think about. How do you define your leadership style? There's nothing wrong with either one, but that's the first piece when I think of your personal brand, sort of defining who you are. Kenneth, are you chiming in?
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat here, and we have Aaron who considers himself to be a service leader. And then we have another individual on the chat who's speaking about transparency and leadership styles. So yeah, people are active and they're speaking about the types of leaders they are. Thank you so very much for chiming in. Any thoughts on service leader or just the transparency and leadership anyway?
You know, I think all of those, the servant leadership style truly falls within the broader transformational leadership theory. And then the transparency, that to me, from my research, falls into the transformational leadership style as well. So those are elements, right, of those theories, those leadership theories. And when you dive into really, and I'm going to share some tools as we get closer to the end, as I'm going to share some tools that are going to get you excited about who you are. Because once you know who you are, then you're able to go to a sponsor and say, this is who I am and this is what I'm looking for. And you can clearly articulate it. You can take ownership of your brand and people will know who you are. But absolutely, great. Being transparent really means that you're willing to lay it all out on the table and people will be able to follow your lead based on your openness and your willingness to share. And again, that goes into the relationship building component that we'll talk about as well.
Great
discussion. So what I would, as I wrap up the personal branding, these are some things that I want you to think about. Who are you? Truly, who are you? You must know who you are. Also, do you bring your best authentic self to interactions with others, right? I know we think about authenticity. What does that really mean? But if you're one person in this group, another person in this group, and you're trying to mold, you're going to forget all your different personalities. And then when that wrong personality show up in this group that you tried to be in, it's going to be very uncomfortable, right? So I tell people, show up as who you are, because it's easier to be who you are than somebody else, right? Also,
well, let's speak about that, because I have a question here from Fran. And basically the question is, when you are working in an organization where the culture needs a drastic change, where do you start when you have been given the task to change culture by your leadership? And I want to be mindful, especially, you know, in this current social injustice environment, and just kind of a re-examining of how we do business as corporations. I want to be mindful that as the diverse population at an organization, we're not 100% responsible for doing all the heavy lifting. So Fran, don't feel like this is all your thing. Like you need support from leadership. I know they're asking you about changing the culture, but that's a supportive thing, and it has to be for it to be effective. Dr. Traveler, any comments on that?
That is so true. And what I would say is that, and I know this is probably a phrase that's a little bit outdated, but I still will use it, the tone at the top. The tone at the top is going to drive down the messaging. Now you have to, as you're starting to think about culture, if there's no support, if the leaders are saying, oh, this is a great initiative to be involved in, but when it's time to go and be a part of whatever that initiative is, if they're too busy, then that shows you it's not important to them, right? And then the ownership and the blame, again, of this failing fast and failing forward begins to now sit on your shoulders, Fran. So you have to have those very tough conversations. What is it that we're looking to accomplish, right? Ask those questions. What are we looking to accomplish? What are the goals, right? What is it that you're asking me to do? How does that align to the broader organizational goals and vision and mission? Because what will happen, you could find yourself going on this proverbial bunny trail that gets you nowhere, right? Yeah. And you just feel busy and you're frustrated, and people are like, well, we don't know what's going on. Well, everyone isn't on the same page, right? So that goes back to think like a business owner. Are you communicating effectively? Have a plan, document it, right? And say, this is what you're asking me to do. This is what I think I'm hearing. I just want to confirm. And then I want to put some key milestones. And then we're going to parse out these responsibilities amongst X, Y, and Z. And I think that will be a good way for you or anyone else that has now been entrusted into this work, right? Because just because we are people of color, Black women and Black men, does not mean that we own 100-year history of something that was in place before we got there, right? So I think we have the right, as we are developing and being asked to be in those roles, to say, no, this isn't a just me thing. This is a us thing. This is a we thing. And this is how we're going to do it together.
Exceptional.
Was that helpful?
That was extremely helpful.
Absolutely. So what I would say as we begin to wrap up the personal branding component is you must invest in your personal development. You have to take the initiative, right? You have to make sure that you understand your strengths. And we'll talk about a resource that will help you to identify your strengths. But do you know your top 5 strengths? Most people do not, right? And so as you're putting your brand together, you want to make sure that as you're going and seeking sponsorship, that you're bringing your best authentic self to the interaction, and you're not setting yourself up for failure, because when you're not clear on what you bring to the table or what you're looking for, people will make those decisions for you. And you could get placed in a situation that is polar opposite of what you even have aspirations or desires to do. So knowing that, going to that conversation is going to set you up for what I consider success as you're navigating this corporate America journey.
You know, I'm going to speak about our former guest, JT, again, but she also says brand or be branded. So either take control of your brand or someone else will brand you as what they want you to be. And that's a really important piece as we speak about kind of cultivating and becoming leaders organizationally. You don't want someone to make those decisions for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've led many initiatives. And so some of the grassroots initiatives that I led with the Chamber of Commerce, it was just that. There were different leaders and someone said, I want this person to do X, Y, and Z. Shagranda, let's put them in the program and you develop them, get them ready. And that person had no desire. They didn't have any of the traits that was needed. And people would thrust individuals into roles that they were not ready for, and that wasn't a good fit. And so I think as you're taking ownership of who you are and who you are as a leader, try to, again, I don't want you to not say yes to challenging opportunities, but if you know it's something that you will despise and you will literally want to pluck your eyeballs off, do not focus on that, right? Because it will set you up to be miserable, and every interaction that you have after that will be miserable, and it will be defined by that particular situation. Okay, so now let's look to the other side. We'll talk about growth mindset and relationship building, right? So what I say here as strategy number 3, embrace a growth mindset. Now I know that I'm probably using some terms that are very familiar, or I'm probably using some terms that you're probably have your cell phone out and you're Googling like, what is that? But growth mindset is a term that was created by an academic scholar, and she had tons and tons of research on what growth mindset is. And I've done many of sessions on growth mindset, so I could talk about this topic all day. But what I would encourage you to do is put an asterisk by that topic and go out and do your own research, because what you will find is that when we look at growth mindset and forward capability, that is you taking the initiative, right? So you have to see change as an opportunity for growth and not a problem. So often we think of change and immediately our mood changes. You know, we go into a meeting and someone says, this is changing. And you're just like, well, we just changed it yesterday, right? Now, on organized change and erratic change is something different. But change, you have to change. You have to change your mindset to accept the fact that things are going to change. Broaden your perspectives. Bring some flexibility to those ambiguous situations, right? Ambiguity is corporate America. And if it was very clear and straightforward, we wouldn't read about some of the situations that organizations are finding themselves in if it was so straightforward, right? So you have to be flexible in those ambiguous situations. And I love the book by Shonda Rhimes, The Year of Yes. You have to learn to say yes. So when people are stopping by your office, hey, you want to go to this networking meeting, or you want to do something, you have to step outside of your comfort zone. You have to change your mindset, especially now in this virtual situation. I've been on so many virtual networking meetings. Initially, I will say that I had to adjust my own mindset. I was like, is this really going to be valuable? But it's what you make it. It's what you bring to that environment, right? Now, I'm not saying spend all of your time in these environments, right? Because Zoom fatigue, all of that those are real things, right? But you have to be willing to take the initiative to strengthen your business acumen. Get out there. What is your industry doing? What are some of those emerging concepts that's coming out? Because again, out of sight, out of mind. So when the economy begins to shift, and we're praying for a quick shift, right? But as things are changing, you don't want to be left behind, not really having a seat at the table and speaking the appropriate language, right? So think about that growth mindset. And I'll close this out with one final thing. Network and build relationships. You have to. You must, you must, you must. Building effective alliances with others is what's going to keep you at the table, right? Because we keep asking for a seat to the table as leaders, but building those effective alliances with others is what's going to keep you at the table. You have to display professional maturity. Professional maturity is, again, it is core to your leadership brand. It is core to you thinking like a business owner. It is core to your mindset shift. So that display of professional maturity, you have to stay away. And this is, again, Shagranda's thoughts. Stay away from those destructive dialogues about other people and groups. You have to do that, right? Because you will find yourself in a situation where it's hard to get out of it when you have a label on you, right? Just as Kenneth said, you're either going to brand yourself or you're going to be branded. And the brand you want is a positive one. Our words matter and they are powerful. So do not get stuck in that trap of taking part in gossip, right? We all have heard for years, decisions happen at the water cooler, decisions happen at the golf course, but make them meaningful conversations, right? And it's okay for you to step away from a conversation that's not being constructive. It is perfectly okay, right? And some relationships are liabilities, right? And you have to, again, as you are growing and forming who you are as a leader, you have to be able to know the difference of what's going to support your growth and what's going to hinder your growth.
So Shagranda, I want to speak to you about this, and I don't want to lose this, right? So, needless to say, I've just looked in amazement at your career and the success you've had kind of navigating these spaces. And I always wondered, how someone, let's say like yourself, right? A Black woman, how, and even a Black male, you always heard for years that these opportunities were presented on the golf course. These opportunities were presented at social clubs that maybe we didn't have access and or invites to. And I'm just wondering, if in the current environment with things being remote, like, is this an opportunity quotient? Does it present us the opportunity to say, hey, look, we can kind of jump into these discussions because they're taking place on a different platform? Or does this further exclude us? Because it seems like, I've heard people say sometimes they believe that there's another meeting off of the Zoom meeting that's taking place that they're not privy to. And I'm not saying that's any different than the water cooler, but it's a concern for a lot of professionals, and in particular professionals of color that are looking to advance in leadership roles.
What I would say to that is a tough one. And it is tough because you're absolutely right. There is the meeting before the meeting, right? There is, when people are talking about succession planning and talent movement of talent. I've gone into sessions where my talent of color, the manager would say, well, this person behaved this way when they reported to me. And I said, well, that was 10 years ago. Do you not think the person has grown a little bit? But what we have to also remember is sort of going back to some of the things that we've said before. We have been branded versus let people know what our brand is. So that's why this is an opportunity for me to share with the team. This is now, how do we rebrand ourselves, right? Because we're all in this same situation. What I would say about the current pandemic is that it has afforded me a break that I never would have given myself.
Gotcha.
And that is something that when I think about how do I look at this from a growth mindset perspective, I would have still been missing out on the opportunity to do what I love to do. And that's come and speak and talk about these things because I was so busy. So I think about that. You're absolutely right. It is going to be tough, and it has always been tough to navigate this environment. But when you're seeking sponsorship, you have to let people know what you bring to the table. And that has worked for me. And I could say that I'm a person, if you ask 100 people about me, and I've actually have done this. I've asked, how would you describe me? Consistency came up over 90% of the time in reference to me. So I know that you can have a career where you're not gossiping and you're not doing all of those things, because once you understand who the people are that you're dealing with, you have to trust them. You have to trust that they're bringing their authentic selves to that situation. And if it's something about them that says run, trust that, right? And that's how you begin to navigate. And those are the things that I would say when you build those relationships that matter. But you have to display the professional maturity. You have to be able to sit there sometimes and noodle in a matter of uncomfortableness, right? And to figure out what's the best way to address this. If you're in a meeting and someone says something disrespectful to you, do you cause an outburst on the call with that person, right, in that setting, or do you take it offline? You need to understand the resources, right? If you're in a hostile work environment, you need to report it. Those are the type of things that's going to allow you to keep your reputation intact in the midst of chaos.
You know, we have a question from Aaron, and it's, you know, it's how do we rebrand ourselves? But I think you speaking about consistency may really answer that. Do you have any additional advice to how someone would rebrand themselves?
On the next slide, and we can go to the next slide, Christian. These are some tips that I would recommend, right? So as we go through these recommendations, right? This is my call to action to you. First, embrace your authentic self. This book, StrengthsFinder 2.0, was the best $20 I've ever spent in my life. And when I tell you that, it allowed me to understand who I was. And literally, I have the book. So I'm not just telling you to get something that I don't believe in. This is a book. It's an easy read. It's a quick read. But what you'll find with this Clifton Strengths, I mean, has been rebranded now to Clifton Strengths. There's 34 different core strengths. And so when you take the assessment, and I think the assessment may have been $40, but you take the assessment and it will give you your top 5 strengths. So that's something else that's going to be a game changer, because when people are talking, right, about their strengths, most people of color have probably never even heard of this book. But this is what our colleagues are talking about. This is a book that they're talking about. They're talking about their top 5. So, you know, not talking
we have
about
we have some people online saying great book, so we have some people familiar.
Absolutely. And when you go through this book and you begin to learn yourself, oh my goodness, this is a life changer. Second thing, be a servant leader. Give back. You have to think of your community. You have to think of others in need and give back. Be that type of leader. Also, as you're thinking of rebranding yourself or just really forming the core of who you are, be business savvy. Be able to speak the language. Immerse yourself deep into the industry knowledge, right? And I'm not taking anything away from our Facebook platforms or any of those other platforms, but sometimes it's going to take going to the Harvard Business Review, going to Forbes, going to some of those more official platforms and getting that industry knowledge. Understand who your competitors are in your organization. You need to understand who's been fined, who's been sanctioned, who is laying off talent, who is hiring talent. Is that an organization you want to work for? Those are the things. So as your business savviness comes in and you're branding yourself, you could brand yourself as a thought leader, right? Are you contributing to the dialogue to progress the organization and the industry or the discipline forward? Nurture your passions. You are more than your job title. I know that we keep hearing that, and I cannot remember the name of, her name is Tashonda Duckett. She is one of the CEOs at Chase, and I'm probably going to mess up the quote, but it's something to the effect that you You own your character, but you rent your title. And I think that's important because we get so fixated with the organization that we forget about who we truly are. And so I think that's going to be a way to bring our best selves to some of those interactions. Also, mental health, that's important. You have to decompress. You have to take care of mind, body, and soul so that you can be whole and be able to support others and bring them along as well. You need to go from chaos to clarity. This is something that I would tell you as you're rebranding yourself. I'm the type of person, my personality affords me the ability to absorb an astronomical amount of information. I mean, I could read 6 different books at one time, and my brain is wired that gets me excited. Some people will say you're crazy, and that is overwhelming. So I have a tool that I use with individuals, and I tell them to do a data dump, meaning I tell them to get out a sheet of paper. Yes, get out a sheet of paper. Now, it's going to be hard to find that because we're digital, but I really say get out a sheet of paper. And for 5 minutes, just write down everything that comes to you. It may be a bill that you have in your purse that you need to pay. It can be, I need to get the kids some new soccer shoes, whatever. Write it all down. And you have to purge, because what will happen, just like a CPU on a computer, the brain is the same way. We can only hold so much. Then when you find yourself just spinning and not getting anything done, that's the same thing with the computer. We're in overload. So you have to put all of that information down on paper and then prioritize your to-do list. Get at least 3 things done off of that to-do list. And I'm telling you, the way you will feel following that exercise is amazing. Next, network. You'll see that I've highlighted the term maintain. Right now, in this spirit of everyone wanting to support each other, that's great. But we have to maintain these meaningful relationships, right? So it's easy to connect with someone on LinkedIn or Instagram and hey, let's connect, but then you don't do anything to nurture that relationship. And that's important. Minimize distractions. Eliminate those activities that are time wasters, right? And as you're going through the process of rebranding, and when you begin to shed those layers that are not necessarily the part of the new you, again, that's part of some of those tools. And then finally, this is just something that I think is important. And as I close, I want to encourage everyone to go out and exercise your right to vote, right? That will definitely make you feel better in this current environment that we're in. But Kenneth, and team, as I wrap up, I want to leave you with 3 things that have worked for me. And throughout my course of my career, I've been in the middle of shifts within the organization. Most recently, I found myself impacted by a job elimination, as many people have. But this is what I would say. 3 things that have worked for me, and I want to leave this with you before I hand it back over to Kenneth. I get things done through forward thinking, right? I listen with a different ear, and I solve problems that truly matter. So when you're thinking about your brand and you're thinking about who you are, have that type of statement ready. Team, I am Dr. Shagranda Traveler. It has been my pleasure to talk to you today. And Kenneth, I'll turn it back to you.
You know, thank you so very much for just an amazing presentation. Also, thank you for mentioning, congratulations to Shonda Duckett from JP Morgan, recently named the first Black female on their operating committee. So kudos to her. Tanya Ship is on, and she wants to know if you would provide some examples of how one should give back. And Tanya, yes, you may not receive a copy of this recording. However, it is available and will be available on the Urban League Jobs Network, the UL Jobs Network YouTube channel. So you can find this and all of the other Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series episodes there. But let's get back to the question. Can you provide some examples on how to give back? We only have a minute or two.
What I would say is figure out what is the greatest need in your community. I give back by always being involved with a local food bank. I believe if we can take control of hunger, right, that will solve a lot. I'm not going to say it's going to solve everything, but you will be surprised the individuals that come into a food bank and give back in that, give back with your time, right? Is there right now, kiddos are, some are going back to school, some are being virtual. Figure out how you could help, but start locally with your community and figure out how you can roll up your sleeves and just dig in. There is so much to be done, and typically volunteerism is a thankless job, right? So figure out how you can get involved and help to take a little bit of the burden off of some of the leaders that are volunteering as well.
Excellent, excellent. Well, listen, we sincerely appreciate your time today. I just think that we've been on pretty much a leadership role, and I'm excited because we will continue that role on October 28th when we invite Jamil Rush. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jamil. He's an amazing gentleman, and he's actually president of the SHRM chapter out in the metropolitan Philadelphia area, but works for Aramark in the D&I space. So we're excited to have him, just as we were excited to have you today. You were amazing. Thank you so very much. I knew it was going to be incredible. Your consistency. Oh, do me a favor. Send people out to take a look for the book. What's the title of the book again?
Absolutely. So my book is Retention Strategies to Prepare and Maintain Talent for Future Leadership Roles.
Love it.
Go out there. It's written from an academic perspective, right? Because I am a scholar practitioner, but please, it is tools. It has tons of information about leadership styles. And then I did a case study, a multiple case study with different leaders, and I have come up with some of the top 4 things that those retention strategies. So take a look at it, dig into the information, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, Dr.
Yes.
Shagranda Traveler, and however I could be a support to you and be a part of your journey and your network, I would love to do that.
Wow, thank you so very much for offering that to our audience. We did it again.